Love you, brother. Thank you, worship team. Thanks for holding down the fort. Well, it's good to be with you. If you don't know me, my name is Connor. I have the privilege of serving as one of the pastors here at Edgewater Alliance Church, and we are in a series right now entitled Live Like Jesus. Live Like Jesus. And I want to start with a little bit of a goofy question this morning. Raise your hand if you know somebody who you would say is an impulse buyer. Somebody who's an impulse buyer. Keep raising your hand if that person is your spouse. No, don't do that. Don't do that. You might find yourself on the receiving end of some impulsive wrath if you do that. But there are like sales structures out there that seem to be built on this idea of an impulse buy, that they want you to buy without even counting the cost, without really thinking about the implications. And maybe you've been to one of these things before. Have you ever been to a timeshare presentation before? So my wife and I was kind of earlier on in our marriage. We only had one kid at the time, and finances were pretty tight. There was not a lot of disposable income, but we went to Charleston, South Carolina for our anniversary, and we were kind of making a thing of it. And then somebody stopped us kind of on the street and gave us like the pitch to go to this timeshare meeting. And they're gonna give you, free stuff. They're gonna give you a gift card. They're gonna give you a carriage ride around Charleston. There might have been something else. And they're like, all you have to do is just go to this thing. And they're like, you just have to make this amount of money. I'm like, I don't make that amount of money. He's like, that's fine, just go. I'll tell him you do, And so I'm like, okay, well, we really get all this stuff. He's like, you really get all this stuff? You just have to go. And I'm like, okay, I'll go. So I show up to this thing, and the salesperson is there, and I just start to tell him, like, I'm trying to be nice, but I also, like, I don't want to, I'm just like, so we're kind of just here for the free stuff? Like we'll sit through whatever you want us to sit through, but, like, we're really not interested in buying any of this. And that's what I tried to communicate. What you might have thought they heard was, I'm super interested. Sell me like your life depends on it, right? And if you haven't been to one of these presentations, let me kind of cue you in on how they do not typically end. They do not typically end with the sales rep telling you to pray about the decision. They don't tell you to phone a financially savvy friend and get their opinion on the matter. They want you, typically, I think, to just sign up and deal with the consequences later. And some of you, that might have been like your religious experience. Some of you might feel as though you have been pressured to kind of make an impulse buy as it relates to your future and what you give your life to and who you believe in and where you trust. And what's kind of interesting is although I think that has sort of been an element of evangelical culture for a while, what's interesting to me as we journey together through the book of Matthew is that as I look at the life of Jesus, while Jesus certainly wants people to make a decision that he believes is good for their life and good for their future, it's almost like Jesus slows the process down. And this is surprising. It's almost surprising in a similar way as imagine if you get to the end of the sales pitch with the timeshare representative and you're like, it sounds awesome. I'm in. Sign me up. And the sales rep is like, whoa. Let's breathe. Well, why don't you think about the implications of this a little bit for your life? That would be shocking. And it's sort of interesting to me, kind of given a major part of evangelical culture and how some of this has functioned, that when you look at the life of Jesus, it seems as though that's actually kind of what he does. That while he wants people to make the right decision and while Jesus thinks it's certainly worth the cost to follow him, there is this sense in which Jesus sort of encourages his disciples to count the cost of following him. And not only does he encourage them to count the cost, it seems very clear in the scriptures that Jesus himself counted the cost. That the path that Jesus himself was going to have to walk was going to be quite costly. And as we enter into Holy Week this week, in kind of preparation leading up to Easter, this is really a good thing for us to think about and to focus on. So without further ado, we are picking up today in Matthew chapter 16, starting in verse 21. It begins, "From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed on the third day and be raised to life." So what we see in the text here is Jesus is very aware of the path that his life is on and the direction where it is headed. And he is also aware that it is not a pleasant path. Isaiah would write that Jesus was a man of sorrows and familiar with suffering. And Jesus is walking this path that is gonna culminate ultimately in the resurrection, which we're getting to on Easter. But first, it's going to go through the valley of death. And Jesus is declaring to his guys, declaring to his team, this is what's going to happen to me. And it seems as though his heart is to prepare the guys for what is coming up next. But they are not enthusiastic about hearing this, obviously. And then Peter, it says in verse 22, took him aside and began to rebuke him, which is not really a good idea when it comes to Jesus. And it says he began to rebuke him. "Never, Lord," he said, "this shall never happen to you." I was talking with somebody between services. It was Jay Bryant, and he goes, that line in and of itself is an oxymoron. To say never, Lord. Like if somebody's your Lord, you don't say never to them. But anyways, here's kind of the scene, and let's use our imaginations a little bit. And I gotta say, I like Peter. I mean, he's all over the place. He's a hot mess, but like I think I might relate to him more than any other disciple. And it was interesting because if you read the chapter on your own time, just before this portion, Peter has this incredible moment with Jesus where he's like, "You're Peter, and on this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it." Like Peter is coming off of a very encouraging time with Jesus. And so maybe Peter in this moment is feeling a little overconfident, but the text says that he calls Jesus aside and rebukes him. You can almost imagine this, right? Where it's, "Hey, Jesus, come here. Look, I know you're the rabbi. I know you're in charge, but let me talk some sense into you right quick, all right? This little death thing that you're talking about, no. I don't know if you've noticed, Jesus, but things are going great. People are being blessed. Lives are being changed. Jesus, you're not going anywhere. And besides, Jesus, I don't know if you know this, but under this cloak, I carry a sword. And your boys, Peter has a little bit of street in him. He's like, we're gonna protect you, Jesus. And even if we can't, and even if people get through us or get past us, Jesus, I've seen what you can do. You can just get out of it. Like you could just disappear, or you could kind of blast some folks, which would be my personal preference. But Jesus, you're not going to die. To which Jesus responds, "It went well." Jesus turned to Peter and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. Get behind me, Satan." Strong language for Jesus to say to somebody that he deeply cares about, deeply loves, and has very big plans for. Now, clearly, Peter is not Satan. So what is Jesus getting at here? Let me phrase it like this. Who would not want Jesus to walk the path that the Father had laid out for Jesus to walk. Who would want that? Satan would. And so there is a sense in which I believe what Jesus is saying here is he's saying, you are advocating for the position of Satan. What you are saying, Peter, is demonic. And as we look at the motives of Peter, there is no inclination that Peter is trying to act in a demonic manner, right? There is no inclination that Peter is trying to speak evil or be a stumbling block to Jesus, but that is exactly what Jesus says he is being. He's saying, Peter, you're acting like Satan. Like this is what Satan would say to me. You are a stumbling block to me. Why? Because Jesus is convinced of the path that he is called to walk. However, the path that he is called to walk, while worth it, and Jesus is, this is clear that it's worth it to Jesus. It's also a path that you would have the temptation to want to opt out of because it is a very difficult path, and it is a path that in the human sense, no one's going to want to walk because it's going to be painful, it's going to be difficult, it's going to be hard, he's going to be mistreated, he's going to be murdered. It's a terrible path to walk. And so if he has people in his life that like him, that love him, that care about him, who are discouraging him from walking that path, that would effectually be a stumbling block even to Jesus. And that's what he says. And so, listen, I think the reality is that there's a lesson here. I think that if you are going to walk the path that the Lord has called you to walk, there might be people who are well-intentioned. Look, Peter was well-intentioned here, I think. Peter loves Jesus. Peter cares about the ministry. Peter does not want Jesus to suffer or have to sacrifice at this level. But what Jesus says is this is where the Father is calling me to go. Listen, you might have people in your life who genuinely love you, who like you and do not want to see your life be harder than it is. And so they might, even with well-intentioned, with good intentions, they might discourage you from walking the path that God has for you. They might say, you don't need to sacrifice that much. You don't need to move there. You don't need to do that with your time. You don't need to take in those people into your home. Just give $20. I think if you were to talk to really anybody who has done great thing for the kingdom that you admire, and you ask them, hey, did you have people, family, friends in your life who said, like, you really don't need to do that much for the kingdom? I think almost without exception, people will be like, yeah. And oftentimes, it's people who love you and genuinely they don't want to see your life be messier and harder than it is, because the reality is oftentimes the path that God leads us down, while it's, I believe, more full of purpose and meaning and ultimately joy and significance and all of that stuff, it's often harder. It's often messier. And what Jesus says to Peter is that you do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. Peter, when you're telling me that I don't have to die, when you're telling me that I don't have to walk this path, Peter, you're only thinking on a human level. You're only thinking about what that's gonna cost on a human level. You're not thinking about the kingdom of God. You're not thinking about what this means for all eternity. Peter, you're thinking on one level. And have you ever had a conversation with one individual and you hear what they have to say and you're like, this is crazy, but I wonder if other people think this too? And so Jesus is having this side conversation with Peter, and it seems to sort of serve as a catalyst to have a conversation with the rest of his team. So Jesus concludes this sidebar conversation with Peter, and then it's like he calls a meeting with his guys. He goes, all right, we need to chat. Verse 24, then Jesus said to his disciples, Whoever wants to be my disciple, which is an interesting phrase because who is he talking to? He's talking to the disciples. So this is something you would almost expect him to say to people who were not yet following him, but he's like, just to be clear, whoever wants to follow me, and these disciples, I mean, they didn't like sign a contract. Like they could leave. In fact, there's a point in the Gospels where people were leaving because of what Jesus was teaching, and he's like, do you guys want to leave too? And so Jesus is like, hold up, let's be really aware of what this costs. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? There's kind of a couple of things that are going on here, I think, and one of them is Jesus is not indifferent to the decision that they're gonna make. That Jesus certainly wants the disciples to follow him. He certainly believes it is in their best interest to do so. He even says, what is it if you gain the whole world and yet forfeit your soul? It seems very clear that Jesus has landed on a position of what the best choice for them to make is. However, Jesus is not wanting them to make an uneducated decision. Jesus is not wanting them to make an impulse buy. He's saying, this is what it looks like. This is what it's going to cost. And do you remember, team? Do you remember, followers? Do you remember, disciples? How I just told you that I was going to be taking a path that would go through death? That wasn't just for me. That's for all y'all. That's for everyone who would follow in my footsteps. That is for every person who would say, I'm a follower of Jesus. I think in evangelical Christianity, we have rightly made much of the cross of Jesus, but at times wrongly minimized the significance of the cross that you and I are called to bear as well. Because if you look at the scriptures, it certainly makes much of the cross of Jesus. The scriptures would say, without the cross of Jesus, there is no hope, there is no life, there is no joy, and there is eternity apart from God in a place called hell. Praise God for the cross of Jesus and all that it means. But also, as you look at the teachings of Jesus, Jesus says, look, if you want to find life, you need to pick up your cross as well. And he says, whoever wants to cling to their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. Listen, have you ever met people who they are just trying to get as much as they can out of the pleasures of this world and they are miserable? Some of them are even succeeding, and you look at them and they would even tell you they're miserable. And then there are people who are serving and generous and gracious, and while they might have some of the things the world has, they're clearly not running after those things as their first ambition. And there's joy and there's peace. And you look at that, and to me, it's like, I think Jesus knows what he's talking about. I think it's actually only Jesus that can satisfy the deepest longings of the human soul. C.S. Lewis has a quote that goes something like, God invented a car that runs on, God invented humanity rather, like a man invents a car that runs on gasoline, and the car cannot run on anything else, and so can the human heart not run on anything but God. You try to put something else in the gas tank and it's not going to go. It's like the car needs the gas and the human needs God, and it's like it's worth it. And if you're pursuing other things, it's not gonna work out. And yet Jesus acknowledges there's going to be a cost. that it's actually on the other side of the grave that there is this life, there is this dying to self that we are called to walk and called to follow Jesus in. And I think it's interesting that I actually didn't plan this out. This is great, though. It's good. That this is the text that we are in as we begin Holy Week this week. And as we are, as a community of faith, going to look at the sacrifice Jesus made, because this is not only something that Jesus talked about, this is something that he called his followers to. And real quick, if you're like, what does this even mean? Because it's kind of, in one sense, it's symbolic language, right? Because the reality is not all of these guys were going to pick up a physical cross, and not all of you are going to pick up a physical cross. I don't think any of you will. And so when Jesus says, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, what does he mean? And I think this might be helpful. I think it's this idea in part that you and Jesus, if you're here and you're a follower of Jesus, that you and Jesus do not co-chair the committee of your life. Are you tracking with that? That you and Jesus do not co-chair the committee of your life. And so when I come to Jesus, and I'm not just talking about pre-conversion, I mean right now, when Connor Neigenfind comes to Jesus, he comes with all sorts of stuff. I mean, he comes with a culture and biases and proclivities. He comes with political opinions, and he comes with aspirations. All of this is normal, by the way. There's nothing any of us can really do about this. I also come to Jesus with thoughts on how I think my life should go. I came to Jesus with thoughts on what my teenage years should look like, and what I should study in college, and who I should marry, and how many kids I should have, and what I should do with my vocational life. And I come to Jesus with preferences on how I want to spend my free time and my vacation, and what I would like to do with my retirement. And all of that is normal. Like, there's a very real sense in which we can't help any of that. But to deny ourselves means that we are going to place all of that at the feet of Jesus and say, thy will be done. Doesn't mean we don't have preferences. Doesn't mean that we can't ask Jesus about stuff, but it's at the end of the day, you and Jesus, if you're going to follow him in the way Jesus calls you to follow him, you don't co-chair the committee. He chairs the committee, and you can submit stuff for him to put on the agenda. But at the end of the day, it's his call. But listen, he's chairing the committee, the scriptures would tell us, with perfect wisdom and with perfect love. That Jesus chairing the committee of your life actually goes better for you in the long run. Have you seen people's lives who have no morals and who have no influence from God on how their life is supposed to go? It gets dark really quick. It gets bad really quick. Have you seen lives where obviously none of us are perfect, all works in progress, all growing, but have you seen the life of someone where you're like, I think they know Jesus, like personally? Not just like have read their Bible, but like, I think they know him. There is depth to that life. There's a joy to that life. There's a peace to that life. And so the death that Jesus is calling us to die actually results not only in the glory of God, but also in the good of those who walk that path, because Jesus says, whoever loses their life for my sake will find it. What it means by losing your life is losing the life that you think leads to happiness and leads to life, but actually leads to death. And so Jesus modeled this for us. And even as we began today, this whole kind of passage began with Jesus telling his disciples about the death he was going to die that would obviously culminate with the resurrection, but we're not there yet. And so we are starting Holy Week in this way. And so as Ron mentioned earlier, for the first time, I think at least in a long time, we are having a Good Friday service. And the heart of this is to prepare our hearts for Easter. Because obviously Easter, it should be like the main Sunday for us as Jesus people. And we should be excited and we should be rip-roaring and ready to go. But I think there is a tendency sometimes for us to rush to Easter and not prepare our hearts well by thinking about what happened prior to Easter. And so we're doing one Good Friday service. We're planning only on about 45 minutes. It's going to be from 6 to about 6:45, and it's going to be really focused on the sacrifice that Jesus made for us. It's going to be more of a somber service, but it's going to set the scene for Easter, and if you're available, I would encourage you to come out to that. But maybe you're here this morning, and this is an opportunity for you to consider following Jesus. And not in an impulse buy kind of way, but in a count the cost. Is Jesus worth following? Or maybe you're here and you've trusted in Jesus, and you would even say, I've placed my faith in Jesus. But as you look at the text today, you realize actually this conversation was directed at people who already identified as followers of Jesus. And you might need to think through. Have I counted the cost of following Jesus? Do I believe Jesus is worth it? Am I going to let Jesus chair the committee of my life? But by way of kind of benediction this morning, I want to read a passage to you. And so if you're able, would you stand at this time? This is from Hebrews chapter 12, starting in verse 1. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Listen to this part. Fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. In a series, Live Like Jesus, Jesus is not only our Savior, he is also our model. Fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. Listen to this. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross. The idea is that Jesus knew exactly what it was going to cost, and he determined it is well worth it. Scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Edgewater Alliance Church, may you count the cost. May you live like Jesus. I love you. Lord willing, we'll see you Friday. You are dismissed.
Thank you for tuning into this resource. Hopefully, it was a blessing to your life and faith. For more information about the church or to partner with us financially, you can go to edgewateralliance.org. And if you're in town, come check out one of our services on Sunday morning. But whether you are watching online or here in person, may you live like Jesus wherever you live, work, and play. Blessings.